if you've ever tried to change somebody's mind about something, and something that's not even, maybe not even that important, if you've been talking to a friend and they have a viewpoint on an issue and they are pretty stuck on it, in a civil discussion, trying to win them over to your viewpoint, which may be opposite or different, is nearly impossible. Actually, I think it might be impossible. I mean, just think about that for a second. Think about all the times that you've been with a buddy who has a viewpoint or an idea about something, and you're like, no, I mean, it's really like this. And they're like, no, I know it's like that. Right? And this happens in every friendship. Almost, you can't agree with each other on everything, right? And so imagine, looking at that in our daily lives, trying to change the perspective of just one person that you know really well, right? Right. Try changing the perspective and the opinion of 35 million people that you don't know, and at the point of a gun. That's the mission in Afghanistan. It wasn't too many days into being in Kandahar that I kept observing the promoter just seemed to be, in my opinion, seemed to be a bit oblivious to what was going on and how much danger we were all in. And she was trying to be in charge, definitely. She was telling us, this, that, the other thing. And she had been there before, granted that. She knew what was going on, but that even perplexed me more. She had already been there. She'd seen what could happen there. And yet she was just like bubbly and she just didn't seem to get it. And one day, the soldier that was in charge of us for most of the trip, he was our military wrangler and protector and bodyguard and everything else, and, made sure that we were always under armed guard when we were moving around the base. He looked at me one day and said, I'm going to tell you something, JP. I said, what is that? If you want to live through this, don't listen to her. I said, what? He said, yeah, if you want to live to get home, listen to me. I'm in control, not her. Don't listen to her. Whatever happens, if something goes wrong, you watch me. You go where I go, do what I do. Don't listen to her. She's not in charge. She's not armed. I am. I know what's going on. I've been deployed here for months. I know what's going on. And I said, yeah, well, obviously. I wasn't really planning on doing it any other way. And so that kind of opened my eyes a bit. I was like, okay, well, this is much more serious than anybody's really letting on. And there was just so many things over there that I was confronted with sort of all at once that were mind-boggling. First thing was there were dust storms around this base. And you could see them coming for miles. And they basically looked like a giant yellow wall. They just were coming up the valley. And the soldiers were telling me, if this hits us, get inside. And I said, well, yeah, obviously. And they're saying, no, said get inside. Because as it is, what we're breathing right now is 32% particulate matter that is actually human feces. That's what the air is made up of in this valley. And I was like, what? And they said, yep. The air here is virtually poison. They've been shitting on the ground here for 50,000 years and burying it under the sand. And there's no moisture. So all of that shit just turns into dust, and that's why the dust is yellow. That's why the ground is yellow. You're breathing in human excrement, right? So that was the first thing. And then it wasn't too much longer after that, a few days later, that I finally found my camel spider. It was late at night. It was hard to go to sleep there. Because it was a bit cooler at night, and it was so silent, and you were just outside, sitting outside a Canada House, and were just always struck by just how quiet it was out there. And we were sitting there drinking water and coffee, a little bit of coffee sometimes too, but that was dangerous because it was a diuretic, so you didn't want to drink too much of it because you'd pee too much. Coffee. And so we're sitting there, and our guardsman, he came over. He said, hey, they found a camel spider over the dormitory. I said, what? So we rushed over with a flashlight, couple of flashlights. We all had them. And we were looking around. All of a sudden, we see this thing on the ground. And it was about, I don't know, it was probably 3 or 4 inches long. Like, it was big. It looked like it was bigger than a mouse. And it looked terrifying. It was white, and it was sitting there, and stupid ass me, right? I go right up to this thing and shine a light on it, right? Well, it turns around and comes at me. So I started running in a circle, and it was chasing me. It chased me for, I don't know, a good 10 seconds or 12 seconds. It was really funny because I was screaming at the top of my lungs and trying to find it with the light. And, of course, the soldiers were like, you should have just turned the light off. It would have run away. But I didn't know. So all of a sudden, this thing was right behind me. And at the last second, it jumped. This thing, I've never seen anything like it. It jumped up in the air about 3 feet and hit the wall of the dormitory and was up on top of the roof, like the little entrance above the door, in just a nanosecond. It was so fast. And I shone the light on it, and I was like, holy shit, is that thing going to get in the dorm? And they said, well, yeah, probably, but they really don't like people that much, so you don't have to worry, right? I was thinking, yeah, it just chased me around in a circle for about 10 seconds while I was screaming like a little girl. And so there was it disappeared. It actually did go inside the building somehow, right in front of us. And I was thinking, oh, Jesus, I just chased it inside where we were sleeping. Yeah, so that was great fun. And so the next thing, I mean, there's just so many things. We spent a lot of time sitting out in front of Canada House. That was where we congregated. There was a large porch there. You could stay out of the sun. You could go inside where it was air conditioned if you wanted. Our big freezer full of water was there, well stocked. coffee, snacks, whatever. There was actually a Tim Hortons on the base. It was hilarious. And a Pizza Hut and a Burger King, I think. And it's just crazy. It was just insanity. And, they had their own money. In order to buy things on the promenade around the central square in the middle of the base, they gave you these coins that's what you spent. You bought those and spent the tokens, right? That was interesting. I was wondering why that was. Well, I mean, why worry about, messing with cash? They just put cash in a central place and you use these coins to buy whatever you wanted. But one thing that comes to mind was there was a lot of American soldiers coming over to see us, and they hung out there all the time. You've seen them there all the time. And I was standing out there one evening around sunset, and this big, just gigantic soldier walked over to me. It was an American soldier. He had a lot of stripes on his arm. I'm not sure what he was or who he was or what he did, but he was a big guy. And I was looking at him, and he said, y'all pretty good musicians. We're enjoying you. And I was like, well, thank you, sir. He said, back home in Oklahoma, he said, I know a lot of musicians back home, and I was like, yeah, there's a lot of players down in that part of the world that traveled through there and all that stuff. I started telling them stories about, going to play in Hugo, Oklahoma, and the different places we played up there when I was a kid. And he looked at me, he said, you know what, I'm going to tell you something about Canada, boy. And I thought, because he didn't seem too happy. And but he was just a big gruff guy, right? And yeah, I'm going to tell you something about Canada, boy. I said, yes, sir. He said, there's two ways to get something done around here. I said, oh yeah. He said, yeah. He said, you can send 20 Americans or you can send 6 Canadians. And I went, my brain just blew up. Because, all the Americans that I've ever known have so much pride in their military. And they are a tremendous military, but they have great numbers. So perhaps they're not trained the same as we are, which they probably aren't. I know they're not. They're trained to go in large numbers and do damage that way or do a job that way. And here was this guy, obviously a commanding officer there, telling me that, And he, as many Americans that I spoke to, appeared to have a great deal of frustration about the mission. And, matter of fact, when we were leaving Kandahar to go to Kabul, I'm jumping ahead in the story a bit, but I was sitting in a vehicle. They were going to take us in a vehicle in shifts out to the plane, and this American soldier came up to my window, and he grabbed me by the arm. He said, "Man, I really loved your music," and says, "I can't thank you guys enough for coming over here to play for us." And he welled up. And he said, they've forgotten about us here. And I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm not even coming from home. I'm coming from Iraq. I was in Iraq, he said, and then I rested. I had leave, 2 weeks leave, and then they deployed me here. He says, I don't even know when I'm going home. This could be a year's deployment. He said, they've forgotten about us here. They're not even paying attention to Afghanistan. They're just concerned with Iraq. He said, they've left us all over here, and he said, they've forgotten about us. And I said, man, don't feel that way. I mean, they haven't forgotten about you. Your family hasn't forgotten about you. And the people that you know there know you're here. And maybe the government's not doing what it should be doing, or letting you, giving you any kind of comfort whatsoever. But we haven't forgotten you. I won't forget you. I'm going to go back home. I'll remember you're here. And the tears just started rolling down his face. This was a young kid, And this was a sentiment that I ran into way too many times at that base and beyond. We were standing outside one night, me and some fellows from Australia and Norway and a couple of Americans, and all of a sudden we heard this huge bang. And we looked straight out across to the far, it was quite a ways, Kandahar airfield was humongous. And so we see a flare go up that lights the whole battlefield, right? And it's way up there, and it's just like daylight. And the siren goes off, and all the British soldiers that we could see all started running. And I said, what's going on? And one of the Americans said, the Taliban is attacking the wall. And I said, what? He said, oh yeah, they do that all the time. He said, we take turns. He said, it's the Brits' turn to go repel them. And I was like, holy shit. And all of a sudden, you start hearing small arms fire, and then you start hearing the cannon going off, 50 mil cannon going off. And this went on for about, 10 minutes, something like that. A couple more flares went up, to light everything up. And then it was just dead silent. And about a half an hour later, some guys wandered in. I saw their uniforms. They were UK soldiers. I said, what the hell happened down there? He said, some fucking idiot was trying to climb the wall, and somebody blew themselves up at the gate, and so we went out and took care of them. I said, what does that actually mean? And he said, look, Mike, it looks like the end of a fucking John Wayne movie out there. They killed everybody. They just went out and fucking killed all these guys and left them laying there. And I said, well, so what happens to these bodies out? He said, well, they come and get them in the night. In the morning, there won't be anything out there at all. All the weapons will be scavenged. The bodies will be gone. And I was like, holy shit. I just couldn't comprehend any of this. It was just, because the soldiers were telling me, these guys know that they can't penetrate this base. The stuff that they were shooting in over the wall, these RPGs, they had no aiming structure. They had no way to aim their weapons, so they were just leaning them up against a rock and just hoping that they got in over the wall. And their technology was nil. And one of the first things they told me was, don't throw batteries away. Because there was a lot of things that were battery-powered, obviously. And I said, why? And he said, well, we don't want them going out in the refuse because that's how these guys power their IEDs. And they string like 100 dead batteries together to just get enough charge to detonate an explosive. And so I was just standing there going like, so this is, how do you fight a war against, how do you fight against anybody? Why fight against somebody who doesn't even have weapons, basically? I mean, they have some weapons, but they're weapons from the Russian invasion of 1979. And I was like, holy shit, this is ridiculous. This doesn't make any sense at all. But that was life on Kandahar, at Kandahar, right? And so then it came time that we were supposed to go via chopper into Kandahar city proper, the actual city, which was just on the other side of a mountain. And there was a thing there called the Provincial Reconstruction Team. It was a base where they were it was a place where, the NATO administration, a whole bunch of different governments, but mostly Canada, was in there trying to help these people, the Afghan people, upgrade the roads, get the kids into schools, all these different things. They really were attempting to reconstruct the province and the infrastructure and all these things. So we had to go there in a Chinook. We originally were supposed to go in Blackhawks with the Americans, but what ended up happening was they couldn't spare the aircraft for some reason. Well, because there was a fucking war going on. There was all kinds of action going on all around us. And so the Americans said, we'll fly you in your Chinook, right? These gigantic, huge cargo helicopters with the two blades, right? Just for people who don't know this stuff, I don't really know that much about it myself because I was just overwhelmed with this equipment and how well it worked and frankly how old some of it was. And but by the same time, let me just take a quick diversion. The Canadians had the best equipment of any country there. One of the things that the Taliban hated were these vehicles called LAVs, light armored vehicles, that held about 6 or 8 soldiers, heavily armed, impervious to gunfire. And they had a name. The Afghans had a name in Pashto for these vehicles. And the word meant the dragon that shits white men, because everybody comes out of the back of it, right? That's what they called these things. They were terrified of them because they had a long-range cannon on them, and these guys, the people that went in these labs, were highly, highly trained infantry and other specialties, right? So when one of these things rolled up on a firefight, the Taliban would go back 1,000 meters, and then the Canadians would start shooting at them. They'd go back another 1,000 because they just couldn't. They couldn't get around us. We were just one of the best fighting forces on the field, and so there was that new equipment and all that great gear and drones and all these things that we had there. But this old Chinook helicopter. I looked at it and I got on it and I was like, this thing is old. And so what we were gonna do, we took all the gear in pallets and they rolled it up in there. And then we got in and sandwiched ourselves in amongst all this shit. And we're gonna fly over this mountain range down into the PRT and do a show and have a get together. We're gonna get our 2 beers while we're over there. And and then the British were going to fly us back that night in the dark, because that was the only safe time to do it, apparently, because, you get shot at over that mountain range all the time. So, and these people did have surface-to-air missiles, so it was pretty fucking scary. So we get in this thing. We fly over. It was just amazing. This machine. I was looking out the window, and they started the engines, and I saw the blades were going by. Whoop, 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 and I was like, okay, they must just be idling. And you could see the blade going by, just like, it wasn't going fast, just lazily going by, you know. All of a sudden, we were 6 feet off the ground. I was like, what? Because when you see a chopper, you can't really see the blades. But from inside, you're looking at it, and you can see the blade going by like nothing. It was just like, it didn't seem to be turning. And all of a sudden, we were 6 feet in the air. And I was like, holy shit. And I'm telling you what, that aircraft was the most impressive thing I have ever seen in my life. It was amazing. We took off out of Kandahar, out of the airfield, up over the mountains, all down through these valleys, like just doing this, you know, a tactical approach into the PRT. Landed on the on the helipad in there. Once we were in there, it was daylight. We were safe. They got all our stuff out. We went into the thing and started meeting all these people, you know, all these soldiers, and there was Afghan people in there, and it was really interesting. It was really interesting. We set up all the gear, did the show, and then after the show, we had a fire, a big sort of a campfire, and our 2 beers, which got us completely plastered because of the altitude. And we had a jam around the fire, waiting for this Chinook to come back, right? So, finally, the word comes down, okay, the chopper's here. They had packed all the stuff in the pallets. He said, I want everybody in full gear, helmets, flak, everything on. Line up on the side of this building. So we got on the side of this building, and the chopper was around the corner and out in the middle of this tarmac, quite a ways, 100 yards probably. And so we started to realize that we were in trouble. This was we were in a lot of danger. And our escort, our guy, our man there that looked after us all the time we were there, he looked at us and he said, listen, they're going to get everything started, get the gear on the ramp up in the belly, and when I say, only when I say, I'm going to say run, 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 and you guys run. And do not stop. No matter what happens, I don't care what happens, you run. And don't stop until you're inside. Don't look for a seat. Don't mess around. Get in and get down inside the aircraft. And when you find a seat, he wasn't the one that told us this part. He said, just get in and hold on to something. So then he draws his sidearm and he racks one in the chamber, and I'm going, holy shit. And it's pitch black. Pitch black. They can't turn the lights on, right? He warned us about that too. He said, you're only going to be able to see basically a faint glow from inside the chopper. That's where you're heading. Okay. So he's waiting. We hear the engine starting on the machine, and all of a sudden, run, and he takes off in front of us. He's got the gun at the ready, and we're running to this chopper up the back ramp inside, and we weren't even in there, and it lifted off, and this woman, British soldier, ran out, and this 50 mil cannon came out, and she was sitting on the edge of the ramp with her legs hanging out of the chopper with this gun in her hands. And somebody yelled, everybody sit down. And so we managed to sit down, and then one of the other soldiers that was flying the chopper said, get your backs against the skin of the aircraft. And our guardsman said, "Yeah, everybody get their," and I knew why. We were providing protection to the aircraft. If we get hit by bullets, there was a chance they would hit our flak vests and keep the chopper in the air. So we weren't 200 feet off the ground when this woman at the end of that ramp opened fire. And you could see the tracers coming up by. They were shooting at us. And she was just wailing on these guys. You could see everything flying by, and I was like, holy shit, we're all going to die. This is it. But we got out. We got out of there, and then there was another brief exchange of fire in between the mountains where she was shooting at people again. And then once we got over that, she got up, and they finally closed the ass end, and we landed back at Kandahar Airfield. One of the scariest moments of my entire life. I mean, it just doesn't get any scarier than that. Some of the things that I saw at the Provincial Reconstruction team base were mind-boggling. There was a guy there, an Afghan. His name, they called him Rocky. It wasn't his name, but that's what they called him. And he was like, he was everybody's buddy. He was just he did all kinds of work for the base. He was just a handyman, kind of idea. And I got talking to him. He spoke good English, and I said, I was talking to him, and he looked to be about, well, he looked like he was probably in his 70s, which kind of flew in the face of what I had been told about the life expectancy for males in Afghanistan. And sometime during this conversation, I looked at him, I said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 45. And I swear to Christ, this guy looked like he was 75. He looked ancient. His beard was white, his hair was white. He just looked 100 years old. And I was like, holy shit. And he was a super nice guy. And the commander of the base pointed out to me that, well, we could see something. There were walls around this place, of course, and the commander mentioned to me that on the other side of the wall was another compound. And he said, Rocky's on loan from that guy next door. And I said, who's next door? And he said, well, he's a drug lord. They call him the Skinner. And I said, he said, if you see that pole out there, he said, just before you got here, I had them cut it down. He said, because you guys were coming here. He said, but this guy, caught one of his own people stealing from him or something. They weren't sure exactly why, but he skinned the guy alive and hung his body from the pole and had been up there for weeks. And that's what he did to people who crossed him. And for some reason, well, not some reason, this drug lord, the Skinner, right, he loved us. He was right next door. He shared a wall with the compound, and he helped us out. But the only reason he was helping us out was because we were likely impeding his competition. Right? That was really what it was all about. We were, causing problems for people he was in competition with. And so he helped us. And it was obviously quite self-serving, but he still helped us. But apparently he came over and visited all the time, and I mean, it was just bizarre, really bizarre. But seeing that made me realize again that the stated reasons that we were in that country, or anybody was in that country, weren't exactly why we were in that country. It was just, there's just no way to organize all of that in your head after a while. So it wasn't much longer before, some of the soldiers around the base were wanting to take us places and show us things there on the base. And these little excursions were optional. One of the trips that we were going to take was to go through the base hospital. And beside the base hospital was a place they called the graveyard. And it wasn't bodies buried there, it was equipment. Vehicles and aircraft and all kinds of things that had been destroyed by the Taliban. And so I decided that I couldn't, it was almost a duty of mine at that point to go on this little tour and see the hospital, see the vehicle graveyard and all this stuff, So we met up early one morning, which was the easiest time to go because it was cooler. And this guide, this soldier, took us all through. First place we went through was we went through an equipment paddock and seen, all of the gear that was there that we were using, and it was quite incredible. And we went into the drone station and met the guys who did that. And amazingly, it was an uncle and a nephew from Shetty Camp that were in there doing all the drone flying. It was really funny. We walk in, and it's like guys we know from home. They're both in the Army and specialists in the trade, and it's like, holy shit, what's going on in Shetty Camp? And so then we went into this vehicle graveyard, and they didn't prepare us for any of this. This is another thing that you have to realize. They didn't tell us, if you're, if you have any mental issues of any kind, like, don't go on this, don't do this. And so we walked into this place, and all these vehicles were all, in different states of destruction. And there was still fucking blood and, brain matter and guts and all this shit, splashed all over the inside of these vehicles. And I didn't even bother, washing it out. And there we were, looking at these things stacked up on top of each other with all this, what used to be people all over it, right? Like, just, there's no words to describe that. So, and found out later we weren't supposed to be taken there at all. But again, some of these soldiers were like, they were doing this in order to show us that we were accepted. They loved us for being there, and they were confident in protecting us. And so they wanted to show us what they were seeing. And I honestly believe that. They weren't, they made it look like they were showing off, that they had survived up to this point. But the truth was, they were trying to make us feel included, that we were brethren, had come over there, with no training and nothing, just to entertain them and make them feel better, bring them a piece of home, right? So then we arrive at the hospital. we walked into this sort of a front room, which was a tent. Really, everything was a tent, hard-sided tent, sort of. And there's, I don't know, 8 or 10 Afghans sitting and laying in there with all missing limbs. Legs, arms, fresh bandages. And most of them were children. Yeah, so, and they're all just kind of looking at us. And we go by these people sort of in a single file, we're looking at that, and then we enter, amazingly, the ER, the operating room, where there's operations going on right there at the moment we walk into that room. They've got people on the tables, cutting them, you know, fixing them, sewing them up. There's fucking blood everywhere. Everywhere. It looked like a slaughterhouse in there. And we get through there, you know, there's people screaming, all just pandemonium. And we go through there, we come out into the sort of a ward, a recovery place where these soldiers are, and Afghans. They couldn't give Afghans a bed because they weren't sure who they were, right? So a lot of the Afghans were patched up and just left out there to recover and then get the hell out and home any way they knew how. But we went into this ward and we looked in on soldiers who were Americans, Canadians, all kinds of them, who were in their hospital beds, you know, just blown to rat shit. And there was one guy, one American. Boy, he was in a horrible mess. And he was conscious, and he was smiling and happy because he was going home. And that's what he said to us. He said, well, you know, I lost a leg, and I'm all blown to pieces, but I'm going home as soon as I'm stable. Fuck. You know, just, there really is no way to absorb and compartmentalize what you're seeing in that situation when you're a civilian. And that part of the trip, that one day that we did that, made me realize something that I hadn't really thought of before. We have a military because we feel, for some unknown reason, that there are threats to our sovereignty in our land and people, you know, here on this soil. And that when we go away to fight, we're somehow protecting this soil. To my knowledge, there really isn't anybody in that part of the world that's even capable of getting here, let alone mounting an organized military assault on Canadian soil. The chances of that are virtually nil. So I started thinking about this, you know. These people, these soldiers, are good people. They join up for the forces with every good intention to either become better educated, you know, to learn a trade, to learn, and to pitch in with this tradition that we've had ever since the First World War, that if we were needed, we'd go there, right? But what's really happening is the government, every government, especially in the West here, the government is quite simple. They take these young kids and they turn them into killers. They're teaching people how to kill people. It's not something that you put in the front of your mind when you join the forces, but it's obvious the whole point of having a military is killing people. That you're going to have to, you're probably going to have to pull the trigger on another human being. And you think you're ready for that, but you're not. And every soldier that I've ever talked to who saw action either never talks about it or can't shut up about it because it's so traumatic that unless you're just a complete psychopath, you can't get over it. It's not something that you can just go. You try to tell yourself what the military teaches you. It's either them or us. So if you have to kill a combatant, he was going to kill you. So it's okay. You did what you had to do. But the real human part of it is these innocent young kids who, came in loud and large, wanting to do something patriotic and grandiose and something, for themselves, for their future, end up in a place like Afghanistan where they're killing people every day and watching their friends die and get maimed. And we wonder why we have a problem with soldiers coming back home and never being able to fit back into society. You have to think about this. How can you possibly fit back into a society when your last job was fucking killing people? That was your last job. You're now looking for a job in a company or a business or whatever, or a trade. And you just spent the last 2 or 3 years being at the ready to aim a weapon and kill someone who's trying to kill you. How do you ever come out of that? The truth of the matter is, you can't. And only the strongest individuals can come back to the world and have a life, and the rest of them are lost. And nobody helps them. The government doesn't help them. The forces don't help them. And since 2007, I've basically heard nothing but this same story from hundreds of veterans, of soldiers who are still serving, soldiers who are out of the forces now and trying to cope. And when I walked through that fucking hospital and saw, what was really going on and how bad it really was, and saw the graveyard of those vehicles where hundreds of people had died, it completely altered my life. And at that point, all I wanted at that point was to get the fuck out of Afghanistan. That was the end of the wonder, the wonder and amazement of the place, and any kind of good feeling that I had being there, because I wanted to help those soldiers handle what was going on. All that ended. I just looked at the situation and went, we have to get out of here. This is insanity. I wish we could leave right now. We can't, because we were, at this point now, due to take a Hercules to Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan, 7,700 feet up. Hardly any oxygen, just crazy thin air. The seat of power of this so-called government that had been installed. And knowing what we knew about everything that was going on, none of this was pleasant or inviting. It was actually, at this point, terrifying that we were even going to... It just got to the point where you looked around and seen so many things that you just became paralyzed. You're just like, okay, this is hitting me so hard. Everything's coming at me at once. I just want to crawl in this fucking bomb shelter and stay there until somebody can get me back to Mirage. That's how traumatic it was. When you realize just how serious everything was and how many people were dying on a daily basis, Afghan and NATO forces combined, like you couldn't get your head around it anymore. I'm going to close with this last little bit. And amazingly, we're going to have to do a part 3 because we're not done yet. We had a photographer, a dedicated photographer with us. His name was Corporal Preed. And he was an incredibly nice man, and he took pictures of us the whole time we were in CAF. He had gone over to PRT with us. He'd come back. He was with us the whole time. He was a tremendously nice man. And we're probably going to start next week's episode with his story, which is an awfully sad one. But in closing for this week, I just want to put something in your head. And I've said this before in this series. I don't espouse any religious bent or political bent or anything. I try my very best, especially in the last 20 years of my life, to just live in reality and see everything through that lens. Because the fact of the matter is that so many things that we're shown by the media, by the government, by everybody around us, it always has some filter on it that twists it into an agenda, a larger agenda, so that we're supposed to believe certain things because of an agenda, right? It doesn't even matter whose agenda it is. We should all force ourselves to look at things through the lens of reality, no matter how unpleasant that is. And I started off this episode by describing, how hard it is to change one person's mind about some little thing. I'm going to close this episode with this thought. We keep calling who is ruling Afghanistan as we speak right now, keep calling them the Taliban. That there's some big deal about that. Like the Taliban is this thing that needs to be eradicated or is in the wrong or whatever. The reality of the situation is the Taliban are Afghans. They're not foreigners from some invading country that are taking over the country against the will of the majority of the people. They are Afghans. They're Afghans, and they were the rulers of the nation before we went in there. And the system that they rule under is exactly what the population allows them to do, because they follow a certain type of Islam, and that is what their normal is. Of course, to outsiders, it looks insane and horrible and everything else, but this system of living for these people has existed since the 9th century. So, and in all reality, these people are no threat to us. None. If we hadn't gone in there and stirred up the hornet's nest, because now you probably have actual terrorist cells in that country now. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, whatever. All these crazy bastards are just bent on killing everybody. But the Taliban are native Afghans. They were the original rulers. They were the original group of warlords that have been in control of that country for 10,000 years. And just because we decided to go in there for 2 decades doesn't mean anything to them. Nothing. They're just like, okay, well, they were here, they're gone. The Russians were here, they're gone. The British were here, they're gone. Now let's get back to life, because this is how we do things. So, as horrible and terrible as that form of religion and religious leadership seems to be to us, because we don't live there, we're not Afghans, we're here, we have a different way of doing things. As horrible as that all looks to us, to Afghanis, it's completely normal. And the people who are trying to escape Afghan are the ones who have realized that there's a better way of living than that. And everyone's allowed to make that choice. And everybody who wants to leave Afghanistan right now should be allowed to leave. If they've come to that conclusion after watching how things are done by the traditional warlord way of doing things there, and they don't want to be under that rule, let them go. That's reality. You're not going to change anything in that country. You can't. It has never changed for millennia, and it has never changed since Muhammad. Those people went into that with their eyes wide open, and that's how they choose to live. And the people under them choose to live that way. I met very few Afghans who even referred to the Taliban. You know what I mean? They didn't talk about the Taliban like there was some invading force. It was the natural structure of their lives. And that's what we're missing. We don't get that in the West. We don't get that about anything that's foreign to us. We think that everybody has to see the world and themselves the way we see them. And that's a losing battle. You're never going to do it. You're never going to talk somebody out of being a Muslim or a warlord or a communist or a whatever. There's 35 million people there. You're not going to do that. You can't do it. They have to come out of that situation, which they eventually will, probably, on their own. It has to be a natural, grassroots situation controlled by the populace. As, all the other successful countries have done. Revolution happens. Calmer heads prevail. Smarter people get in charge. On and on it goes. The idea that we're going to go in there and shoot them into submission and then walk out and everything we told them they can't do anymore, they're just not going to go back to, that's absolute fucking lunacy. There's no way that's ever going to happen. And everybody knew that going in. And when I was there, everybody knew that. That no matter what was done, There would be no change after we were finished there. So I just hope that everybody that wants to get out of that country right now can get out. And then I hope that we can just give Afghanistan time enough to normalize to its own level again. Leave these guys alone until everything gets sorted out. And then if there's a way for us to help them modernize in some way or whatever that looks like, then let's do it. And if not, they're a sovereign people. They don't need our interference, no matter how bad it looks to us. From outside, we can't judge a society that's lived a certain way for thousands of years. That's the way they are. That's the way they've done. Leave them be. Leave them be. That's the only thing that makes sense, I think. But then again, I could be wrong, And maybe that's the problem. Not enough people have ever looked at a situation like Afghanistan and said, we could be wrong. Maybe we don't need to go in there. Maybe none of this is necessary. But nobody did that. Nobody said, well, maybe we're wrong. They just went ahead. Too many people just refuse to question themselves.